Okay, Munir Ajam again, video number 2 on planning and scheduling. In the previous video, we talked about the process of scheduling, which means how do we schedule a project or a phase or a stage or a major deliverable for a project. In this video, I'm going to shift the discussion to the project life cycle, and I have already taken the liberty of drawing this before we started this video, which is the standard camp model. So basically, for those who have been following us, know that SUKAD have a methodological approach for managing project called the Customizable and Adaptable Methodology for Managing Project, or CAMP, C-A-M-M-P. And the standard model, which is the basic model that we start with, and obviously as the name indicates, customizable and adaptable, that means from industry to industry, company to company, project type to another project type, we have to modify this project life cycle model. So obviously there are two major names for this in the industry today, in the project management community. This is a project life cycle model. Also, some people call it the stage gate process. So CAMP is a methodological approach that have a standard model based on a project life cycle with phases and stages and gates, and also include, how do I say this? Include the management of project, or how should we manage a project from concept to closure. So sometimes we call it C2C as well. So it's a project life cycle model or stage gate model that consists of phases, stages, and gate. Yeah? It covers a project from concept to closure, so it is not just a phase of the project. So I'm not like just doing construction, or I'm not just doing engineering, or I'm not just doing software development. Yeah? We are going back all the way to the concept life. And as we mentioned, this life cycle can be modified. Now with this introduction in mind, then how do we schedule projects? Well, in the previous video, we talked about the process of scheduling. Now I want to talk about scheduling across the project life cycle. And the third video, the rolling wave, will reinforce somewhat of what I'll discuss in this specific video. Let me just quickly give you a quick introduction. We have three major phases in the project life cycle: discovery, development, and delivery. The discovery phase have two stages called concept and feasibility. Obviously, if you want to know more detail, you can refer to some other videos. We have a lot of videos on this. And what you see here are gates. What's important for us for scheduling is these arrows here. During the feasibility study, which is part of the discovery phase, early in the project, which is, if you are a PMP or follow PMI or ISO, this is what PMI call pre-project. So technically, the project charter is not there yet. The project charter happened at this gate. So during the feasibility, in order for us to determine the feasibility of the project, we have to determine the cost and schedule, because obviously economics, returns, expenditure, cash flow depend on schedule. So we need to have a schedule in mind. So based on the CAMP model, in the feasibility stage, we have to develop what we call a class 1 estimate. Okay? I call it class 1, some other industry call it class 5. Anyway, think about it as the first estimate that's done in the feasibility, and will be used to help us determine the feasibility of the project. And in that estimate, we will have a high-level schedule. So we'll talk about cost and time. We will have a high-level schedule that probably mostly focusing on the phases of the project, the stages of the project, the duration of each one of them. Now, here depend on who you are and where do you work. If you work in an organization that is highly mature and have a proper system and concept, you probably have some information in your database, in your corporate knowledge data, historical record, that give you a life cycle with the approximate duration for each one of them based on the standard model, assuming you are doing the same type of project. And now what you need to look at, obviously, now your project is unique, so you have to look at your project specific using what we have established in the organizational database and try to update. So the first estimate might have just a rough duration of each stage in the project. And of course, to help us determine when we will finish. That could be a very high level estimate of time, which means schedule. That might be 20, 30, 40 activities at most, even if it is a mega project. At that early stage, we might do some more detail, depend on the need. So remember, project management always should be linked to what you need. It's an adaptive project management model. Now, at this time, when we have the feasibility, the only scope we know is very high level scope. We know what the product of the project is, but we don't have detail. We have not defined the requirement yet, and we don't have a project management plan. We don't have detailed plan. All of these are not done yet. So basically, this estimate obviously is very rough, and it could vary widely because it's not something that's precise or highly accurate. Usually, it's accurate enough to allow the organization to decide to authorize the project. And that's why this is in PMI, in ISO word, is pre-charter. So what management used this estimate for as part of the feasibility to help us decide if we continue or not. Well, obviously, if we don't continue, the project stops. But if we continue, then the project management team will go ahead and do they define the requirement, collect requirement, technical requirement, management requirement, product requirement, government requirement, everything that you need to collect in terms of requirement. Of course, you'll explore for stakeholder expectation, and then you'll have your requirement. And then once those requirements are approved at gate 3, we go into what SUKAD calls the strategy stage, where we start to develop many things, including a class 2 estimate, or the second estimate of the project. Now, obviously, the second estimate comes later than the first one, probably weeks or months later, depend on how big the project is. We now have more detail. We have requirement. We don't have detailed planning yet, but we have the requirements. And we have our strategy for procurement, for best practices, for life cycle, all of this information have. So we can develop another estimate that is updated, that is more accurate, but still not detailed enough to allow us to go into implementation or execution. Okay? So that's the second estimate. So estimate 1, estimate 2. If management approves the project to continue at gate 4, we go into what we call the definition stage in the CAMP model, which is detailed planning. That may be equivalent to detailed requirements in software word, or detailed plan with maybe creation of the backlog, of the product backlog with all the different products you want to do, if you want to go agile. If you are in capital project, we might call this is the, if the project is real estate related, maybe this is architectural design. In oil and gas, we call it preliminary engineering. So this detailed planning, now we have quite a bit of detail. And as we work those detail, okay, we develop the final estimate. Well, not necessarily, we could do more estimate there, but technically the final estimate in the early phases, which would be used for the final approval of the project and maybe funding the project at gate 5. So obviously, in terms of cost, for example, this is what we call the semi-definitive estimate, or the plus or minus 10% or 5% estimate. In terms of scheduling, it's probably plus or minus 5% of the duration, depend on whether your project is 1 year or 5 years. So this will be the third detailed estimate. So let's close this video. What we are saying here, for each of these estimates, I will use the processes discussed in video 1, because the same process. Obviously, the difference here is that here I have a high-level estimate, then I detail it further, and I detail it further. Why? Because technically here, I'm breaking down, for example, a major phase into maybe the major deliverable. Over here, I'll probably make the major deliverable into smaller deliverable. Here, I have work packages. So technically, all what we're doing, this is what I guess PMI, PMBOK, they call it progressive elaboration. So as the project is progress, we elaborate more on the detail, including the scheduling. And this is why we technically recommend 3 different estimates. Obviously, this is for medium to large project. If your whole project is 3 months long, maybe 1 or two rough estimates could be enough. Again, project management is adaptive. You have to adapt to the organization you need. Most capital projects, even if they are small in size, we still recommend 3 different estimates for them. And the third estimate is the one that is used for final funding. Again, in each one of these estimates, we use the processes discussed in video 1. So this is how we estimate. This is how we schedule. This is how we plan across a life cycle, across the stages of the project life cycle. Video number 3, I will be repeating the same thing, but in a different way, talking about rolling wave planning and the concept of rolling wave that some people in Agile think they have invented, which is something actually we have been using in engineering, in construction, in capital project for decades. And how do we plan across the life cycle? Next video. Thank you.